Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today on Masechtas Beya Daf Yud Gimel, we are going to begin on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, about 7 lines from the top, with the words Omer Abaye. In yesterday's daf, we were discussing when it came to a person who wanted to be moilo malilos, we allowed on Yom Tiv for a person to be able to crush the pods in order to separate the chaff from the kernels. And we asked the question whether or not a person at that point is obligated in the separation of truma. Normally, when it comes to the separation of truma, if a person has an achilas arai, only a small snack or a temporary amount of eating, that is not enough to be mechayev in the separation of truma. However, when a person is malilos, as we said, it is necessary. Alternatively, if a person initially brought into their house for the purposes of making dough, and then they changed their mind in order just to be malilos, since the chi of truma fell upon it, at that point they would also have that obligation remain. So again, Omer Abaye, Machlokis, this dispute, as we mentioned, between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi, is bishibolin, is only regarding the bundles of grain. When we're talking about legumes, divi hakol asuraisa tavla. When it comes to legumes, we say that it takes upon itself the status of tevel, and therefore there's an obligation of the separation of truma. It's considered to be like a gemar malacha. As Rashi explains, the reason why when it comes to kitnios, everyone agrees. Yesh b'nei adam harbi she'ein choftin osen yachad. There are many people that they do not do this all in one shot. El kedei kedirasan, only enough for their meal. Therefore, says Rashi, b'chavilin zehu garnon. This is an act of its completion, and therefore we, as we'll see in a second, a proof to this. That is the din. That when it comes to kitnius, everyone holds that there's a chiyuv of separating of truma. And let's use the following statement in Masechtas Trumos as a riot to this. Mishahayu chavili tiltan. A person had these bundles of tilson. Some people translate as fenugreek. What's most important is Rashi says it's a min kitnius. So this is going to again prove that when it comes to legumes and the like, that there is a requirement of separation because it has the status of tevel, as it says now clearly, shel tevel harizeh kotesh umachashev kamazara yesh behen. A person at that point can break open these kernels of these legumes and umachashev, and you could even estimate and have a good guess as to how much is in there. You only need to separate the truma in accordance to the amount of seeds that are there, but not the wood. Or as Rashi says, ein sarach lahafresh min hakashim. You do not have to separate from the straw. As we're going to see, Rashi alludes to what the Gemara is going to say. There's a tremendous chiddush that even though when it comes to the tilton, the fruit and the eights are similar in taste, nonetheless, lo chayvuhu chachamim b'maisros. When it comes to the eights or the kashin, it's not necessary to separate that. That's not part of the amada, part of the estimation. Now, based on this statement, it seems to be approved. My law, back in the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. This must be like the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. The Yomer Hasam lo tavla. He says over there when it comes to the wheat grains that it's not tevel, but hacha tavla. Here, clearly, when it says kitnios, it's considered to be tevel, and therefore we're going to establish that this is with Divrei Hakol. They don't argue when it comes to kitnios. Lo. Rabbi, maybe this is exclusively like the sheet of Rabbi. One second, Rabbi, if we want to teach the bigger chiddush is not kitnios, but even in the case of wheat grains, he also considers it that you're mechuyev in the separation of trubas and maisos, as we saw above. L'moy malilos Rabbi Machayev. So why would it mention the case of kitnios if it's like him? Teach the bigger chiddush, they're even chayev when you're mo malilos of wheat grains. Elamai, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. So again, let's go back and say it must be Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore the chiddush is by kitnius. He agrees. So 1 second. If that's the case, Shmeinan Sharmini Kitnios, the Koshkin Tiltan. It would make more sense, instead of using the example of this fenugreek, this type of kitnios, just mention all other types of kitnios. And why? Because tiltan is less of a chiddush, since the seed is never separated from their jackets or wood. Other beans are separated from their jackets and put into a separate pile. So if this would be tevel, then koshken tiltan would be tevel. But now, why do we only say tiltan? There must be a specific chiddush by that. Ella tiltan itzrichale. It's not coming to talk about kinnis. It's coming to teach us specifically this particular chiddush regarding tiltan. And what is the chiddush specifically by this? As we mentioned, that because its fruit and its wood are similar in taste, therefore lifresh nami a'etzo. You would think you also have to include the wood or the straw in the cheshbon. Kamashmon, that's the chiddush by tiltan. Ikad some say omer by machlokas b'shibolin. The machlokas, as we saw above, is by shibolin. Abel b'kitnios divrei asaraisa lo tabo. However, when it comes to the case of kitnios, it's the opposite. It's definitely not tevel. So it's interesting. It's the opposite approach. Not that everyone holds for sure it is tevel. On the contrary, it's not tevel. And why would we say the opposite when it comes to kitnios? So Rashi says, "Machlokas b'shibolim behanhu machayev Rabbi lefi shaharbi kainsin oiso l'malilos." A lot of people, this is what they do with the grain. They roll it. B'kloyo shalhen garden. Abo kitnios stam tachnasasam l'maruach v'saraisa l'tavla. It says until this gemar malacha is taking place, it's not considered to be tevel. So this temporary action of being momalilos by kitnios is not something in which will constitute the chiv of tevel. The problem is we just mentioned a statement which clearly says it is tevel. Meseh misha hayalo chavili tiltan shel tevel, and as we said, tiltan is a form of kitnios, and it says clearly it's tevel. Harizek kotesh machashev. You could rub it and break it down and make this estimation. Kamazera yesh behen, how much seed is in there? Mafresh el zervin and mafresh el eitz. So my lab tevel tabo shel truma. L'chayra, this is a question. We see clearly that when it comes to kitnios or this tiltan, that there is a concept of tevel, and therefore it means that you, the Yisrael, have an obligation to separate the truma gadola, the 1/50th or 2%. When it says low tevel tabo shel trumas meiser. This is actually talking about a totally separate, unique situation regarding the Levi. What happened? The Ravo Omer Rav Shimon ben Lakish. The Omer Ravo Omer Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Meiser Rishon Shekdimu b'Shibolim Shemo Toivlo Latrumas Meiser. So what ended up happening? Normally, what happens is the Israel completes the process, has everything complete, all the grain is broken down to its finished state, and then he separates the Trim Gadol. The 2% he gives to the Kohen. And then the Levi will get the Meiser Rishon, the 10%. That Levi in turn will give the Trumas Meiser, also known as Meiser and a Meiser, the 10% from it to the Kohen. But that's not what happened here. Over here, the Levi went quickly, even before it was completed, and took his Meiser Rishon. So in that situation, the din of Tevel is not on the Truma Gedola, but we require the Levi to now have to separate the Trumas Meiser. He has to now give 10% of it to the Kohen. Says Rashi, L'olam ein chavil gemar malacha. Really, it's not completed. The ilu gabi Yisrael havi loy havi mikri tevel. For the Israel, it wasn't tevel because it wasn't completed. Elba ben Levi koi. We're talking about a Levi. Shekadam b'holach eitz l'Yisrael. He went to the Israel. V'natam meiser rishon mimenu b'chavilin. And he took it before it was completed in these piles, in these like bundles. B'hoyel v'chalal chavilin halol l'shem meiser. Since he did take his 10%, he took his Meiser Rishon, and that's Chal, so we say also, Trumas Meiser, Min Meiser, Shal HaLevi Lahafresh V'Hibamisa. The Levi has to also separate it. The whole Teres Truma Leha, the Truma Kori Rachmana. It's considered to be Truma. Not that it's considered to be Truma completely for this, in the hands of the Israel, rather for the Levi. The Levi has to separate the Trumas Meiser. It's not talking about Truma Gedola. So Gemara says, 1 second. If we're talking about the Levi, it seems like we're asking a lot from this Levi. It says Kotesh. Kotesh Lamui. Why are we requiring this Levi to actually break it down and to complete it? Let the Levi say, Kihechi dioibli hachi diavinalach. Just like I took it in an unfinished status, so to you, the Kohen, I'm going to give it to you in the same way. Why do we require him to do katisha, to grind it and break it down so it's completely a finished product? So Marava Kanasa. The reason is we kanas the Levi. The Levi should not have taken his Meiser Rishon when he did. He should have waited until the Truma Gadol was taken off. And by the way, if the Truma Gadol would have been taken off properly, the Yisrael would have completed the process. So now that you took it before, okay, great, for yourself, it's considered Meiser Rishon, but you now have an obligation to break it down to be Kotesh before you give it to that 10% of that to the Kohen. Tanya Mihachi. Ben Levi Shanasnul Shibolin, B'Masraisav. If you have the Levi that again took his Meiser Rishon in an unfinished process, Osa and Gorid. The Levi must first make them into like a girdle into silo, which means it has to be completely broken down and fully processed before you give it to the Kohen, the Trumas Meiser. For that matter, if you took a Novim, which of course means they're grapes, they're not finished, Ois and Yayin. The Levi actually has to first make it into wine before he gives the Trumas Meiser to the Kohen. For that matter, Zaysim Ois and Shemen. Same thing, if you took olives, he has to make it into oil. Mafer Shalain Trumas Meiser, and only then does he separate the Trumas Meiser from the finished product, V'Noisen L'Kayim. So it must first be completed as a finished product before the Levi gives it to the Kohen. Why? Shekashem Shetruma Gedol Enu Niteles, as we continue Yud Gimel with Beis, just like when it comes to the Truma Gedola, that which is, again, the Israel gives the 1/50th, 1/40th, 1/60th to the Kohen, that doesn't take place Elomin HaGoyrin, means it has to be completed. Omin HaYekev, it has to be from the wine press. As Rashi says, Shenig Markul, it's completely a finished product. Kach Trumas Meiser, Enu Nitelis Elomin HaGoyrin, Omin HaYekev. So when it comes to Trumas Meiser. Now it's usually not an issue, because if the Levi took it when he was supposed to, the Meiser Rishon, it was a finished product, and he would just simply give it to the Kohen. But since the Levi took it before, so therefore the din is that the Levi has the kanas, that he has to break it down and finish it so it can be given properly to the Kohen. Now the Gemara asks the following question. It says, Machashit, when it comes to, we're establishing, we're not talking about Truma Gedola, when it comes to an estimation, which we know you can estimate your Truma Gedola, or establishing this entire statement as Trumas Meiser, that the Levi gives to the Kohen. So is that true? You can actually estimate it? Hamadina boy, I thought you had to give the exact measurement. The Levi has to give exactly 10% of his Meiser Rishon to the Kohen. So not necessarily. Hamani Abba Elazar ben Gimelhi. The Sanya Abba Elazar ben Gimel Omer, he says that even when it comes to Truma Gedolas, we'll see, even when it comes to Trumas Meiser, that the Levi gives to the Kohen, that also be done through estimation. As the pasuk says, the next Trumaschem. So why does it say Truma in a plural form? So it's B'shtei Trumas Kas Medaber. Achas Truma Gedola, Ve'achas Trumas Meiser. It's comparing the two. Geshem She Truma Gedola. Nitelis Ba'oimid Uvamachshava. Just like when it comes to Truma Gedola, the Israel can give his 2% through estimation to the Kohen, also B'machshava. Also with a thought process. As Rashi explains, you can cast your eyes on one side and eat in the other. In other words, all you need to do is have this machshava, I'm going to separate it. That's good enough, even though you didn't physically do it yet, but you basically declared this was going to be doing. You're going to be doing. So again, the reason why we're saying all this is it all has to fit. That we're talking about a case where the Levi took his Meiser Rishon before his time, and he gave it to the Kohen afterwards the Trumas Meiser. So only the Trumas Meiser, we say it has a din of Tavel, because he took the Meiser Rishon. Since it was considered as Meiser, so therefore it takes upon itself the Tavel, namely that the Levi, before he could eat his Meiser Rishon, he has to give Trumas Meiser to the Kohen. Again, the issue with that was twofold. First of all, it says that he has to Katisha, he has to complete it. We say, yeah, he has to before he gives it to the Kohen, because that's a Kanas on the Levi. And second of all, this is another Chiddush that you're allowed to do a Midah, you're allowed to estimate not just Truma Gedola, but even the Meiser Min Meiser, also known as Trumas Meiser. Kufa. Going back to what we said before, Amar Bavo, Amar Shimon ben Lakish. Meiser Rishon Shekdimu B'Shibolin. If you have a Levi, again, that took before his time, Shemo Tavli. So we say that it has the name of Tavel, but Trumas Meiser, regarding Trumas Meiser, that the Levi now has to give his 10% to the Kohen. My time, Amar Rabba, Hoyel V'Yatzal of Shem Meiser, because it has upon itself the name of Meiser. Says Rashi, V'Rachman Omar, V'Ramaslam Mimenu Meiser Min Meiser, Mishe Nikra Meiser. Once it takes upon itself the name of Meiser, because again, he took the Meiser Rishon, so therefore he now has to separate the Trumas Meiser from it. Amar Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Meiser Rishon, when it comes to the Meiser Rishon, Shekdima B'Shibolim, again, this Levi took it before his time, Patim et Truma Gedola. Now, again, what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to separate the Truma Gedola first, and then the Meiser Rishon is taken by the Levi. And then the Levi gives 10% of that to the Kohen, known as Trumas Meiser. Now, since he took the Meiser Rishon first, there is a mixture of Truma Gedola that was not taken yet. There's a part of that 2%, in the Meiser Rishon. So the question is, when the Levi took this before, is there a requirement of the separation of Truma Gedola to be given from this pile that the Levi took? Again, the Levi is going to be giving his 10%, the Trumas Meiser, but there's also Truma Gedola in there. So we say no, that is patur from Truma Gedola. Shnemar, v'aramosim imenu Trumas Hashem. Meiser, that's what needs to be separated. Meiser min Meiser martilcha v'lo Truma Gedola, u'Trumas Meiser min Meiser. So the only requirement is that the Levi has to give Meiser min Meiser, which is Trumas Meiser. But he does not have to give the Truma Gedola. So therefore, even though it may be Truma Gedola that's in it, nonetheless, it's not necessary for him to contribute to that. What happens if he took it after it's a completed product? We know that once it's a completed product, we know that he would have to take the Truma Gedola from it. So tarimu es kol Trumas Hashem. On this, the pasuk says that you actually do have an obligation to give all the truma to the Kohen, Truma Gedola as well. So Marisa, so how do you explain this? How come sometimes the Truma Gedola must be given and sometimes not? The answer is very simple. Ha'idgan v'hailu idgan. It depends if it's reached its final status of being grain. And therefore, if you took it before it's in a pile, which is before its time, so therefore the chov of the Kohen did not yet fall upon it, and therefore you don't have to separate the Truma Gedola. However, if it was already a completed product, then already the chiyuv of Truma Gedola that was supposed to be taken, so you took it before, it doesn't matter, you still have to make sure that part of that Truma Gedola is given to the Kohen. Tanan Hasan. So we learned over there, it's brought over here, in Meisters, it says as follows. A makav oirin, a person who peels the dark shell of barley seeds, what you should do is you peel off one at a time and eat it. Which means, by doing it in that fashion, it's a achilas arai, and we said, therefore, as Rashi says, upatim in a meiser. At that point, it's pater, the chihaygab, the achilas araihi. And therefore, that's what you're able to do. Back in the Gemara. However, im kolaf v'nasan l'tech yado chayv. Let's say you peel it and you stick it into your hand, then you're chayv and meiser, because that's keva. You're not just eating one by one, you're like piling them up in your hand. That's already considered to be an achilas keva. And therefore you're going to be chayiv in meiser in that situation. Amr Rabbi Elazar v'chein l'Shabbos. He says, so too when it comes to Shabbos. Now what does that mean? So Rashi says, achas lo havim afarik. Nafarik is a tolda dedash. We know that one of the lamites malachos is threshing. The question is, how are you allowed to separate one from the next, from the good, the good from the bad, bad from the good? So the answer is, it's kaliyachar yadhu. If you're doing one at a time, it's considered to be dash kaliyachar yad in an unusual way, and therefore it's not considered to be an issue on Shabbos. Aval, says Rashi, mishikaptin biyado havi todas disha v'chayev. If you end up doing it in a way in which it's all piled up in your hand, that's the normal way of doing it, and therefore you're going to be chayev. Eini, for the Gemara, it's not so. V'ho Rab mikalfale debesu kasi kasi. He used to peel for his home and fill up cups, which sounds like that's not a problem. Rav Chia mikalfale debesu, and Rav Chia also did kasi kasi. He also filled it up. So l'chara, that can't be the case, because we see that these great people did so. So el iyatmar asefidmar. Rather, when it talks about Shabbos, it must be talking about something else. Hamoyel malilois, a person who again is rolling this wheat, which in general, as we mentioned, is a temporary way of doing it, and it's not a gemar malacha. Shalchitin, if you do this with wheat, so menafech al yad, you can fan them with your hands, the ochel, and then you could eat it. It says Rashi, below meiser. You don't have to separate meiser because this is temporary. V'im nafach v'noisel techikai chai. But let's say you remove it and you put it, let's say, in your lap. Let's say, and you pile it up, or you're sitting down, you're piling it up on your bosom. So in that case, you're going to be chayev because you're accumulating a lot, and that's more of an achilas keva. Amar Rabbi Elazar v'chein lo Shabbos. So too, if you do it this way, it's not allowed. So the fact that it was done in your hand is less of an issue than on Shabbos if you would pile them up in your lap, which is considered to be more keva, and therefore that's also considered to be the normal way of doing so, and that's what's not allowed to be done on Shabbos. Rabbi Abba Bar Mummel says, "V'reisha l'maiser in l'Shabbos lo." So the ratio, which is not talking about wheat, but we're talking about barley. So you're saying that we're talking about, it's only referring to meiser, but not by Shabbos. The din of taking one at a time is considered to be an achilas harai, but has nothing to do with Shabbos. Is that the case? Umi ikamidi del in Shabbos lo havi gemar malacha, lo meiser havi gemar malacha. If it's a gemar malacha, it's a gemar malacha. So if it's considered Shabbos, it's not gemar malacha, so you're not chayev. So why, by piling them up in your hands, is that considered gemar malacha that you're chayev and meiser? It's hard to understand. If it's a gemar malacha, it's a gemar malacha. So masking for Rav Sheshes v'Rav Idi below, you're telling me that we don't make such a distinction. But Garna l'meiser, when it comes to the gairin, there's a chiyuv of meiser. None. Ezu Garna l'meiser. What is considered to be like a gairin, a completed product from meiser? Hakishuin b'haduluyim. When it comes to cucumbers and gourds, melons, mishi yifkisu, it's when it falls off of the flower. The shalo pasku, and if it did not fall off, mishamid arma. Says Rashi, kloimer v'im ad shalo paksu. If before it fell off the flower, hemid arama mehan, a person decides to do a trick with them, come in, kri, puts them into like a pile, hukmu. That in itself will make it set. Al Muhammadus arama havi gamar malacha meiser. Arama actually over here is the separating and putting it into a pile. That's considered to be gamar malacha when it comes to meiser. But however, Rashi says in Shabbos mishahevi but salam lebeso. It's only when you bring it into your house and Muhammadus arama malacha. Before you do this, that's not making piles of the onions, as we'll see in a second, is not considered to be a malacha. So we're basically showing there could be a chiyuv of meiser, it could be a gemar malacha regarding meiser, but not regarding Shabbos. So let's read this one more time. When it comes to the gourds and the cucumbers, mishit, yifkasu, it's when it falls off the flowers when it's chayiv. V'shlo paksu, let's say you didn't fall off yet. Mishamid arama, it's when you make them into a pile. It's nami gabi b'tzal. When it comes to onions, mishiyamid arma, it's when you make a pile of onions, and what's chayiv and meiser. Gabi Shabbos hamad arama potter. If you just put it into a pile, that's not enough until, as we said, until it's brought into the house. So what do we see? We see that there is a distinction. Therefore, it's not a problem. By the ratio, when it talks about barley, yeah, there could be a chiyuv of meiser that it's a chiyuv keva when it's put into your hands, but you may not be chayv in Shabbos. El ma'is lachlamemar melechas machshavas asur Torah. Hachanam melechas machshavas asur Torah. And therefore, the only time you're chayv if you follow what's called melechas machshavas, that you actually violated the Torah, the one Lamtes Malachas, in accordance to how it's done in Mishkan. Says Rashi, El Ma'isel Chamimor, Apa Gavdol Ma'isel Habi Malacha, was Shabbos Malachas Machshavas, She Malachas Umnois Asur Torah. It's when you complete it. Shenismacha Parshas Shabbos Parshas Mishkan, Malachas Mishkan, the fact that they're juxtaposed in Parshas Vayakel, V'hasa Malachas Machshavas Ksiv. So therefore, it's only when you have actually violated it completely in accordance to the Malachas Machshavas, which is what you bring into your house. So therefore, it's not a question. Okay, 2 dots. Ketzad moilel. So we conclude with this daf is exactly how do we rub these kernels? What does that mean, the rubbing? What are you doing? How many fingers are you using? So by Mishmei Rav Yosef Omer Chad Achad, 1 finger to 1. So your thumb and your pointer finger. Rab Avi Mishmei Rav Yosef Omer Chad Tarti. This still constitutes as a chilas arai, 1 finger against 2 other fingers. Rabbi Amr Kivan, the Mishani, since you're doing it in a unusual way, Vil Chada Kuhu, Nami. Even 1 against all of your fingers, but provided that's being done with 1 hand, that's considered to be a shinui. And therefore it's considered still as a chilas arai. Ketzad menafech. So exactly how is this notion of blowing, literally, says Rashi, Darin La'el, L'mocher menafech, Miyad liyad b'Shabbos. It says on Shabbos you're supposed to blow it or fan it with your hands. What exactly does that mean? So Rav Adamarava, Omarab, Menafech, you're supposed to fan it as we continue to Daled and Aleph, Mikishri etzbaisab v'mal, with the tips of your fingers and above. So Machol Abamarava, literally the people in Rashi says Kapo, not supposed to use your palm, you're supposed to use your tips of your fingers. So in B'Marav and Eretz Yisrael, they laughed at this. They said, Kivan the Mishani, since you're making a difference, if you'll be cool yadinami, you should be able to use your whole hand. After all, it's a shinoi. Elam Rabbi Lezer, menafach biyadu achas v'kol chaycha. You can wave and fan it with 1 hand, with your whole hand, with all of your strength, all of your might, and that's not an issue. Okay, we're going to stop here. Now we're going to see all of the questions. Elu beis devarim nechlu behem b'gemara im hukvol meiser b'shibolin. So what were the 2 cases where there was an argument? So as we regarding the obligation of meiser when it came to the wheat kernels. So one has to do with bringing the tvua and eating it ma'at alidei malilos, through rubbing them. Also, the second machlokas had to do with kitnios, as we saw. Question 14. Mishahilu chavili tiltan, which is also in Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Shel tevel harizek kotesh machashev. Madu mutal olav kotesh. Why does the Levi have to do this? Vein mafresh kamo shehein. So there's actually 2 answers. The maskana is we're talking about the Levi who took it before his time, and therefore it's a kanas because he should have waited. He was over on lo ta'acher. The other shot was we're talking about the Yisrael, and therefore we thought that the fact that it has to be kodesh, because the pasuk says the gancha, the rabbanon is kein deraisa tikkun, and therefore even though it may be a din derabanan, it's still necessary for it to be done in that same way. Again, we end up saying Maskana, we're not talking about a case of Tevel, of Yisrael, we're not talking about Truma Gedola. Over there we're talking about the Levi, and the whole question is we end up saying it's considered Tevel regarding the Levi separating the Truma's Meiser given to the Kohen. Question TA 18. Meiser Rishon Shekdima B'Shibolin, by the Levi. The im mutter le'echel achilas arai. Is he allowed to eat an achilas arai kodim shiafresh trumas meiser? Is he allowed to do this before he gives it to the Kohen? Umadua. The answer is asr. He's not allowed to, because shemo tavel, it has the name of tevel. Yotel of shem meiser, and therefore because of that, he's not allowed to eat it until he gives it to the until he gives it to the Kohen. Okay. TB 21. Mahu lichtoish chitin. Let's see, I'm not sure if I did this. No, that's going to be. There's no questions on that daf on that test. Okay, let's see. We'll conclude Rabbi Gibber's tests. Ketani bebraisa misha hoylo chavil tiltan. It's abtevel kotesh umachashev. So the question is, if we're talking about the Levi, what are the chidushim over here? So one thing I wrote over here was, well, the one which was questionable by Rabbi Gibber, I'll read last. We're speaking about Trumas Meiser, and the Levi must first be kotesh, then give it to the Kohen, since we kanas the Levi from taking it in the status. Not only by Truma Gedola can you estimate and have a machshava, so too by Trumas Meiser you can estimate and have a machshava. And the thing which I'm not sure why he had an issue with, you'd think that since the pri and eights are the same in taste, you'd be equally chayim to remove with the eights. Kamash Malan, the chiddush is you don't have to separate that. Okay, and that is a chiddush in here. Question 11. On his test. Hamaktin litin meiser rishon lefnei truma. Ne'im halevi chayav lifrosh as a truma mamashin nitin lo. Does he have to separate the truma? So one pasuk says not to be mafresh. The other says still the Levi must also give off the truma, specifically talking about the truma gedola. The difference is when it was made into dagan. The other is when it was yet made into dagan. Lama smirule. Okay, we didn't do that yet. Adkam.